we got the main man, the guy with the media knowledge, the guy with the backgrounds. It's the Jimmy, it's the James, it's the Schneider. What's good, James? How you doing, my man?
Yeah, I'm very well. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us your time and being on the show today. There's so much going on, and basically this is the part of the show where we talk about the media a lot, but we talk about how the media needs to change, what's going on in the media that we can really try to actually change in the mainstream media, but also looking at independent media and what kind of independent media is out there and what we should be doing to promote, support, and also consume a lot more independent media, because of the obvious reasons that are out there, in that the people who own the mainstream media at the moment are not our friends. And when we do consume their media, we are consuming their ideas, their beliefs, and what they want us to know. Whereas there is so much going on in this world, as we know and we see, that we really should be learning more about, and we should be hearing about it straight away, rather than waiting for it to trickle down through into the mainstream media, or as a side piece on the back of the newspaper, that someone's just about managed to get in there. And in an age of modern technology, Facebook's, all the different types of social media, and access to communications, really, why aren't we getting that kind of news quicker? Now, James, there's a little bit of a history about you. You've got some experience. First of all, quick question. I typed your name in on Google, as I do with everyone, and it comes up and it said you were the co-chair of the Oxford University Liberal Democrats.
Yeah,
like
my sins, yeah.
Wait, we all have bad times in life, you know what I mean? But I just love that. I was like, really? Okay, it's not as bad as being, like the co-chair of the Oxford University Tories, you know what I mean?
It's like 2 degrees better than that, I reckon. Yeah.
Only 2. I was thinking 1, but I'll give you 2, man. It was
before 2010, so you get like the 2nd degree.
Yeah, I suppose, to be fair, like before 2010, I didn't really have any politics, so I can't really blame you. You know what I mean? It was around that time, the student movement and Gordon Brown. That whole time was exciting for a lot of people to get involved in politics, and who knew what was to come and what has come now 10 years later. And in that 10 years, I think you've managed to get yourself involved in a lot of stuff. Obviously, you were one of the founders of Momentum. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And also, you were PR advisor to, in my opinion, the greatest leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my guy. Don't know my guy. And since then, what have you been up to? What have you been doing since? It's been a hard year, bro.
It has been. So I was really burnt out after I did about 4 years as basically Jeremy's press secretary, so the main interface between him and the media. And that was, it was extremely full on. It's like, we all know how many attacks there were on Jeremy, but actually there were way more, just not all of them got into the media. And so I was pretty much shot and flattened by the end. So I took a few months off after April. And then I started working as the communications director for Progressive International, which started last year, and it's like a global network of progressive parties, trade unions, social movements, and people trying to bring the left internationally together. So I've been working on that, which has been great. I still keep my hand in with a few domestic campaigns. Was involved with Unite's Fire and Rehire campaign that launched on Monday. Still do a few things with Jeremy, of course, and his Peace and Justice project. And I'm also trying to write a book. So
wow. You're not relaxing, bro. I like it.
I did some relaxing, and I needed to relax, and then now I'm kind of got my energy back, and I want to jump right back in.
I like it, man. I like it. It's good to hear, and I'm glad to hear that you're you still got the fight in you. You still got
Yeah.
that energy. That's important, and we need people like yourself there doing the bits that you do. And on that also, you've recently written a few pieces for Novara Media. Titled "How We Win," and the piece, obviously, that I'm most excited about is "How We Win the Media," talking about what we can do to win. And like, I understand that may not be specifically from a party political point of view, but really from a small p political view of coming from the left, socialism, ideas that are going to make the world a better place for everyone, not just a few. And our view is that the media should be available to everyone and owned by everyone, not just a few. And in that piece, there's a lot that you cover in regards to what's gone on over the last 10-15 years, but also specifically over the last year, and how we've seen many stories come out in the mainstream media. As I mentioned before, things trickle into the mainstream media, but that was thanks to independent media actually doing the investigation and finding these things out. And what I would like to understand really more is your view on how do we put independent media into a position where not only are they getting credit for the work that they're doing, but actually their stories are getting to the front of the agenda rather than being side pieces or being talked about later on. And how you think that will work, how we would do that.
Yeah, so I think it's got to be joined up, and basically I think my approach for how we win the media comes in three parts, and independent media is an absolutely crucial bit to it. So let's start there. I think there needs to be much more done, which is starting to happen with the IMA and Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project is also working on this, to bring together independent media to share resources, to be more able to access funding, to share platforms, to develop shared technology, to have equipment that's available for different people to share. And I think that kind of infrastructural work is a kind of important baseline. Then the second thing is within that is like championing the good stories and making sure that those that have platforms are putting out those versions of the stories and they're promoting those things. So it's like people have suddenly seemed to notice in the last week, because of some row about a flat and John Lewis gear and that kind of stuff, that there's maybe something a bit dodge going on with the government. And this bit of the story is so small fry. And standing saying, well, this questions the integrity and the authority or whatever. I mean, the real issue about government corruption, not a bit of sleaze, government corruption is being baked into the heart of how COVID has been responded to. Absolutely baked into it. And Byline Times, for example, also Open Democracy, have done months and months of this reporting, how one Tory donor gives some money and then gets multi-million pound PPE contract with no experience of manufacturing, no experience of medical equipment. People know about the Matt Hancock pub text, but basically this hasn't cut through to mainstream broadcast, and that's where people are really going to hear it. So while we at the kind of grassroots, we can promote these stories and we can help them get out, it's clearly, that's clearly not sufficient. So then we need to move on to what's the next thing. And then the next thing is people who do have platforms who can get into the mainstream media. And okay, since Jeremy stopped being leader, there has been a retreat from socialists and socialist perspectives in the media. But really, we need to reverse that retreat now. Anybody who is able to get on the media, who's got some access to the media, needs to be organized. We need possibly like a little press office to help do it. Neon, the New Economic Organisers Network, do brilliant work in this, and that needs to be supported, but this can be expanded. And then those people, when they're going on and they do get their small slot on BBC or Sky or on GMB or whatever, they raise these stories, and they, you know, let's say someone's on GMB one morning and there's the latest culture wars outrage that the government is trying to use as a distraction technique, then people on the left should say, no, you know what, I'm not getting into this. This idea that people were trying to attack Churchill's statue, for one, factually they weren't, and secondly, this is a distraction because 150,000 people have died, and there's been billions of wasted money that has been handed out in corrupt, dodgy contracts, and that the whole structure of our state, the privatized state, the outsourced state, is one that drives corruption. This is not an individual mistake. This is not a few dodgy Tories. This is not the odd dodgy civil servant. This isn't a few nasty companies. This is absolutely baked in. And I think that argument needs to be made. And then the third thing I think that we have to do, and this is where, and this can be slightly tricky because journalism is independent, but where it needs to be linked up to movements. Because, you know, how do you get attention in this world, especially in this world in 2021, the attention economy? How do you gain attention? It is with controversy, and it's with outrage and attention grabbing things. Now, we don't have that anymore like we used to when we had the leadership of the Labour Party, because, you know, Jeremy Corbyn could say a big thing, and I mean, actually, by definition, it wasn't necessarily news, but it stood a very good chance to being news. And that, you know, if he were still leader, for example, or if Keir had wanted to push this agenda, if he had been pushing it more, it's far more likely it would have got into broadcast, because it becomes a legitimate news point. Main broadcast journalists are more likely to follow the story. It's more likely to end up on the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news. So we have to look about what resources do we have, and how can people shift the agenda. And then you basically look at movements. Movements can grab the agenda with direct action, with other forms of occupations, stunts, and so on, which forces the attention to our issue. You know, we need to think a bit like, you know, Priti Patel and Dominic Cummings, just in reverse. You know, what did the Tories do when the Black Lives Matter protests just caught fire in the UK? Right, it's not only that they caught fire, it's that they caught fire and they were popular. You know, these are the things that had, you know, not only mass support across the whole population, but then incredibly concentrated support in people, I don't know, under 40, under 50, just like completely common sense stuff, which is why you see the Premier League adopting it and everything else. So they've got to shift that attention away from demands for social justice to something else. So, you know, what do they do? One, there's the Churchill statue thing. No one was saying anything about the Churchill statue, but it makes such a good photo. I mean, from a comms point of view, they're really smart, because what photographer can resist photographing the boarded up Churchill, which then people who aren't following the story that closely, which is everyone, the overwhelming majority of people, they see, well, of course there must be some threat to the Churchill statue. That's why they've done it, and they shift attention. Or Priti Patel has her thing about, you know, there are a few dinghies coming over the channel of desperate people seeking a place of safety, and they're turning up on the Kent coast. And so you create a new super force with a new guy who looks good in a suit, and they take all the photos with him, and they get the RAF planes flying over the top, and the ships go out, and it's spectacle. And of course that makes news. So then broadcast companies, the broadcasters, they go and send their film crews to embed with the anti-smuggler ships, and that becomes news. That becomes the national conversation. So I think, you know, it's not enough for us to just think about how can we improve independent media, how can we get it more funds, how can we get more eyeballs and attention, even though we really have to do that. And it's not just enough, how can we get the few people on the left that can get on mainstream media talking about it, but we do have to do that. It's also how can we, as a movement, drag that attention. So that might mean, the occupying of offices of the big companies, big outsourcing companies that have, made lots of money off failing the public. You know, that might mean, seeking out the family office in Mauritius that received a huge, I think that was another Byline Time story, that received some huge PPE contract, and going and doing some stunt to do with that. That's the kind of thing which will capture the attention, make things viral, demand attention, demand that controversy, and shifts the ground. It shifts the ground that the politicians have to operate on, and it will shift the editorial agendas. Sorry, that was quite a long answer.
It's a lot to take in, but I totally agree with it. Yeah, definitely. And I think grabbing people's attention. What do you think about? Because I picked this up from your article as well. Is and it's something that I thought about. I like the idea of, so for example, I live in Merseyside, just north of Liverpool, and down the road from me, 5 minutes away, is Peel Ports, the port of Liverpool. And I could list to you, and my friends could probably list to you, because the amount of times, the amount of crimes they're committing over there, or how I view them as crimes. I don't want to do any libel or nothing, but there's stuff going on, and I'm like, this is not right. And my way of viewing it is like, shut down the port, innit? Turn up, human chain across the front, shut them down, and highlight what they're doing. Paint it on the floor, put it along the railings, climb up one of their cranes and drop a banner down from the crane, because they're big cranes, and let people know. I agree with that. But then you're seen as criminal. You're seen as causing a problem, disrupting the norm, the status quo. Follow the normal methods. So, for example, the great activists in Bristol who took down a statue just last summer, they were painted as those things, criminal and yobs and all of that kind of stuff. And people said, we'll go through the proper processes and that. And although there were some online, those kind of notable names on the left on Twitter, and also some independent media that defended those people, how do you view that shift in that view, that narrative, that when we do take action on the left, we are criminal and so forth, or we are not taking the proper steps of action against what we see as wrong?
So, and you use the word narrative, and that's precisely right. So there's rebuttal and there's narrative. Rebuttal is something that you have to do because you have to set the record straight, but it in itself is a defensive strategy. So let's take, for example, the protests against the police bill in Bristol recently, where the police, there was the footage, and the police said that there had been a punctured lung of a police officer and several broken bones in an official statement to the press. Now, it turns out that this was not true. It's completely not true. No broken bones, no punctured lung. It didn't take, a great investigative journalist to find out. The police then admitted it and put it out in a press release about 4 days later. So, it's important to get that stuff on the record and show that in the overwhelming majority of cases, and of course there will be exceptions to this, but if you take the great sweep of human history, the aggressors in social justice protests are not the protesters. Those that are causing damage and destruction are not the protesters. Those that are making people's lives worse are not the protesters. So, firstly, there's got to be some degree of getting the facts out, and there can be, partnering with the media that's willing to do that. I think the Bristol Cable played a big and important role in its reporting in Bristol. But secondly, and the bigger thing is this narrative point. And I think, in a way, the incredibly authoritarian bill, this police and crime bill, basically the anti-protest bill that they're trying to force through, is an opportunity for basically anyone who's remotely pro-human. Because if you're remotely pro-human, you need the right to protest, because literally everything that makes our society decent and civilized, apart from the warmth of human relations between people that love each other, basically everything that makes society decent happened because of protest. Happened because people fought for it. happened because people, took great risks to have it. And I think they've put that question on the line front and center, and we've got to take that up. And we've got to take it up and say, this is people trying to change society for the better. Doesn't mean you have to agree with every single aspect of it, but they're shifting the attention to the issues where it needs to be shifted. Let's take Extinction Rebellion, for example, right? In October 2019, we all know that, not 2019, the year before, 2018. It's like, everyone knows climate change is bad. Everyone knows it's a real problem. Everyone knows it's getting worse, and everyone knows no one's really doing anything about it. And there it kind of sits in this sort of stagnant and kind of depressing place. Then you get Extinction Rebellion and the youth climate strikers, and I think it's the relationship between the two that was so good, because you can't dismiss the climate movement as just being lefty radical activist types when you've got all these kids coming out. And you can't just say it's naive and you can just brush it aside with some words when you've got people occupying major parts of cities and closing down roads and occupying bridges and all the rest of it. So it forces the political attention onto the issue. So people don't have to think that each of their core three demands are absolutely correct, and that all of their tactics are good. I mean, the thing that they did on the tube in Canning Town, I thought was dumb, and like completely the wrong target. But overall, it's really shifted attention. It's brought it up the agenda, and so I think we just have to have the narrative that if you're pro-human, you're pro-protest. And that's what we need. That's what we need to have, because I really suspect that, and the left, all across the left, needs to prepare for how we engage with this, because I think that there is going to be a wave of various sorts. Can't predict exactly how it's going to go, but there is going to be a wave of resistance and protest in the UK. I'm pretty sure, because of two major factors, or three major factors. Like, one, all that energy was going into the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. That was where, you had hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, had real hope for that was how change could happen. We can get change now. We through actually basically in quite a traditional way, through the political system, through electing more MPs who support the leader of the party and becoming Prime Minister, and enacting legislative change with support from movements, right? A fairly conventional approach. That's closed down. The second is we've been locked in our homes while we've seen injustice after injustice for over a year. And that pent-up energy, I think, is going to go places. And then the third is we have a government that is picking these, that's not trying to avoid them. That's picking these big fights that wants to, that is willing to take it on and will make things worse. So you're right. I think we need, to support where possible, and maybe this is a specific kind of thing that could be supported, is, specific support for independent media that is providing, fact-based reporting, and that doesn't just accept what the line that comes from the state is. If the police say something, it's necessarily true. That's written with the right level of objective distancing, as one part. And then the other part is as a movement as a whole. And that means, when we're talking about communication, we are also talking about like anything that's got a platform, anything that can make a viral video, all of that. This is, the media is not just people with press cards. The media is the whole communicative ecosystem, the whole, everything that is shifting opinion, and we can act in that.
Definitely. I really like specifically how you're talking about, going back a little bit there about, rebuttal and actually a narrative, creating a narrative. Whenever I've been involved in any type of, whether it be movement, projects, action. It's about making sure that your narrative is clear, why you're doing what you're doing, where you're getting to, how you're getting to where you're going to, or where you want to get to, and making sure that people understand that, because I think,
and how they can fit in as well. I think
definitely, yeah, exactly, because when someone's looking at that idea of, going back to the example, pulling down a statue that's been there for years, you don't pull down statues. But then it's like, well, and this is how I related it to someone, like your local council, potholes, they're annoying, aren't they? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, they never fix them, do they? Oh, no, they don't. And I'm like, so do you remember that guy who started painting penises around the potholes, and then they started fixing the potholes, didn't they? It's like, yeah. And I was like, well, people have been trying to get rid of these statues or do something about these statues for many, many years. And pulling it down is basically their way of painting a penis around it. And when you relate things to people, and I think that's the other thing in the media at the moment, is it's about that relation. And I like what you said in your piece for Novara about telling stories, because stories are relational. When you hear the story of an individual or a group of people, you can relate to that, and that's so important in what we're trying to do in independent media. Another thing that I think people do struggle with slightly is where the media comes from, and how it is funded. Novara, I love their line, a cup of coffee a month, for the equivalent of the price of a cup of coffee a month, will help them keep going. Ourselves at Bywire and IMA, we use similar things. We say, give us the equivalent to one lunch in a week, and you can help us keep going. And what are your views on basically people paying for media, and the fact that there is so much other mainstream media that is basically free to a lot of people? Is there a need to change the narrative around how people actually access media, independent media, and whether there should be a cost behind it?
So I'm in general not a fan of paywalls, because you're trying to reach the maximum number of people that you can, but this stuff is expensive and needs to be paid for. So one is, yes, the crowdfunding, the audience giving freely what they can and what they want to give, and that is an important thing, and people should, if they can afford it, they should support these institutions, and that's one thing. The second is how we can get collective institutions to support them more. So how can we get the ones that we're part of, trade unions, maybe Momentum, other organizations that we're part of, how can we get those to support independent media, either like with material support or in kind support? And I think that's very important. I mean, if you look back to 45 years ago, the most read newspaper in the world was the Daily Mirror, you had, which was straightforwardly Labour supporting. You had a very, very different media ecosystem. The TUC owned the paper that came before the Sun. There's a long history of progressive organisations being a kind of democratic weight within the media, a kind of guarantee of support. So I think, working within our organisations, pushing this agenda within our trade unions, within Momentum, the Labour Party, whoever we are part of, to push them in that direction. And the third thing, which is a less short-term thing, but we could only really do with a Labour government. But we should be pushing for these policies now, and we should be pushing them through the party. Things like a windfall tax on the tech giants in order to catalyse a public interest journalism fund, which can be run, democratically at arm's length, completely at arm's length from the government. And we should be looking at those sorts of policies as well, which will change the media landscape in the future, because the point of getting a Labour government elected is twofold. first, it's to make people's lives better now and to do everything it can to do that. And then the second point is to shift the terrain, so in a more progressive direction, so that progressive forces, progressive actors are able to carry on that change in society. So you'd have to change the media landscape. It's the same thing as freeing trade unions up. It's about changing the ground on which struggle operates on.
Yeah, fantastic. I think the one thing that you missed out was that if you're not already, subscribe to this channel right now. Yeah. Hit the follow button, the like button, whatever platform you're watching on. You know what to do, because you want to know when we're going to be on air next time. But yeah, that to add on to that, not just for ourselves on the Rebel Citizen and Bywire, it is about just those little things as well, making sure that people are supporting independent media in the little ways, the little clicks, the little follows, the little shares. We love them, and it means we can make way more content. Now, James, I've used up a lot of your time, and you've given us a lot of insight. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak to us today.
No problem at all.
There's a lot to learn from, a lot to take in and have a think about, and for ourselves at Bywire and the Rebel Citizen, we plan to continue really pushing the idea that the media can be different. It doesn't have to be what a very few rich people decide they want you to know. We believe that people can own the media. And we hope that you'll join us on that journey, James. Well, I'm sure you will.
100%. You're doing exactly what my one of my favorite quotes is, which is from Jello Biafra, the US American punk musician, who says, "Don't hate the media, be the media."
Easy now, come on. Don't hate the ting, run the ting, my don. There you go, man. Just switched it up. But yeah, that's where it is. James Schneider. My doorbell. There you go. That's what it is. It's my guy, James Schneider. I'm Dan, and this is Bywire.